Hey there, this is Logan Crockett with Full Circle Music. I am coming to you from our recording studios here in Nashville, Tennessee, and we are here today to answer your questions about the music industry. So you guys asked, what are the top 5 music industry podcasts? Well, I've got an answer. So these top 5 podcasts aren't necessarily in order of subscribers or the ones that are most popular, but rather if someone just came to me and they're like, hey Logan, what are the top 5 music industry podcasts that you would recommend? This is what I would tell them. The first podcast that I'm going to recommend is called And the Writer Is. This is a weekly podcast where every week they sit down with some sort of hit songwriter who typically has recently been behind a really big song, and they just talk about what happened with the song and talk about what happens behind the closed doors of the music industry. The second podcast that I'm going to recommend is one that is called Songcraft. Songcraft was actually one of the very first songwriting podcasts out there, and this is a bi-weekly podcast, and they bring on guests, and they do some really, really great research on those guests. So they ask some really, really solid questions that just lead to some really interesting episodes. The third podcast that I'm going to recommend is called the Music Marketing Manifesto podcast. This is by John Ojaka, who founded Music Marketing Manifesto. And this is definitely not the most popular of popular podcasts out there, but it is one of my personal favorites. The episodes don't release all that frequently. Maybe there's a couple episodes a year. But John Ojaka, he was actually the one who I really found online, who I learned so much music marketing from initially. And just everything on the podcast, it's always a different format. Sometimes it might be him with a guest. Sometimes it might just be him talking about a new idea. But so often, the things that are discussed on that podcast just really take your mind to a different place in the music industry and just really open up different possibilities and make you think very outside of the box of what would be considered the norms in the music industry. And I really, really, really appreciate that. By listening to this podcast, I always just get some really, really great insights and some practical ideas of some next steps that I can do with my own music or with other artists. Podcast number 4 is called the DIY Musician Podcast. And this podcast is created by the company CD Baby. CD Baby is a company that has their own conference. And of course, they help independent artists distribute music to things like iTunes, Apple Music, Spotify, all of that. And they also have a really solid blog. So this podcast is just another medium with which they have to reach the world. And that said, it has a lot of really great tips and advice and tactics and ideas, specifically for independent artists, people who are doing music the DIY way, which pretty much everyone who wants a music career starts out going DIY. So if you're hitting some roadblocks with whatever you're trying to do in the music industry and you just need to figure out how to do something on your own, this is a really great podcast to figure some of that out. Podcast number 5 is called Recording Studio Rockstars. This podcast is kind of like it sounds like. It takes you behind the scenes of specifically of recording studios. So they talk with producers and engineers and studio owners, and it's really all things audio. So if you are into that world, creating music on that kind of level with software and microphones and gear and all that kind of stuff, this is definitely a podcast that you would find really interesting. And lastly, I do want to give a little honorable mention to our own podcast that we have here through Full Circle Music. I don't want to include it in the list because obviously I'm really biased towards it because it's our own podcast. But it's called the Made It in Music Podcast. And what's so great about it is a lot of the other podcasts that I've mentioned are very, very specific and driven, like to help songwriters or to help independent artists or to help producers. But in the case of our podcast, the real mission is to actually showcase all sides of the music industry. On this podcast, every single one of our guests who comes on has already successfully made it in the music industry. And that's our mission with the podcast, to help you also make it in the music industry. So I've given you not 5, but 6 podcasts, and we'll go ahead and include links to all of those down in the description. And whichever one sounds interesting to you, make sure you check them out. All right, thanks for watching. If you learned something, if this video was helpful to you, we really would appreciate it if you would go down there and hit that like button. It's super quick, super easy, super simple, and it does make us more friendly with the YouTube, so that would be awesome. But more importantly, we're actually doing a whole lot more videos just like this one where we are answering the internet's top questions about the music industry. And so if you aren't subscribed to our channel and it sounds like you would love to hear our answers to some other questions, then please subscribe so that way you don't miss those. Also, speaking of questions, If you have any more questions, maybe there was something you weren't sure about regarding this video, or you're wondering about a completely different topic in the music industry, go ahead, go down to that comment section and write your question and let us know what's up, and we would be happy to get back to you and answer that, or maybe even make a future video about it. The last thing that I want to let you know is that at Full Circle Music, our team has created an awesome resource for you, totally free, and it's just a free mini training class that teaches you exactly what to do if you really want to have a career in the music industry. So if you would like to check out that free class, and again, it's totally for free, you can click right over here, and if you click on that button, then you should get immediate access to that class, and that would be really cool. Or if you would rather go and check out another video that answers a top question about the music industry, you can do that by clicking right up there.